The Department of Environmental Conservation, Waste Management and Prevention Division is providing this training for all Vermont public or private entities who are receiving and/or managing electronic devices within the state. This training is for collectors who are participating in the free state standard plan recycling program, also referred to as the e-cycles program. If you are managing electronic waste at an in-state collection event, or whether you are a collector operating a business or facility in Vermont outside of any approved state standard plan. First, in section 7559 in Vermont statute, the law requires the Agency of Natural Resources to establish requirements for the management of consumer electronics, specifically for collectors. The management standards also include standards for Vermont transporters and Vermont recyclers, and that procedure can be found on the website at ecycles.vermont.gov. But in this training, we will specifically be addressing collector standards. So to start, we should identify who is considered a collector. The management standards identifies that a collector receives electronic devices and arrange for the delivery of those to a recycler or another collector, sorts or consolidates electronics, or provides data security. If you do any of these things within the state of Vermont, you would be considered a collector and required to register on the state website. And in that registration, you would certify that you will meet the standards identified in the procedure, and we will cover those standards in this training. Regardless if you are operating as the collector in the state standard program, if you are hosting a collection event, or if you are an independent collector operating outside of the state plan, the standards are all the same. The primary message here is to identify exactly what electronics we are talking about, and specifically that these are the electronics that cannot be placed in the regular trash. And this list may be modified over time. Let's talk about storage standards for electronics. All of the ones on the banned list that we just talked about must be stored in a manner to prevent breakage. So sometimes that means just being careful when placing devices into a Gaylord. It may mean making sure larger devices are not dropped on smaller ones. All electronics must be stored within a structure to protect from precipitation, rain or snow, and that structure must have a surface that allows for easy cleanup should a device break. The floor cannot be dirt or rock, and if it's wood, it must not have any holes. In other words, it is important that any glass or other releases can be easily addressed. There must be adequate storage space, and electronics cannot be stored outside under any circumstances for any period of time. So by now you have probably realized that these are not photos of proper storage. So what does proper storage look like? These are some examples of proper storage. Electronics are carefully stored in a Gaylord or stacked on pallets. Televisions are often stacked on pallets and secured by shrink wrap. Also, if Gaylords are not overfilled, pallets can be stacked on top of Gaylords to conserve space, and also when being transported. If you are collecting for the state standard program, covered electronic waste, which is computers, monitors, printers, televisions, and computer peripherals, those must be kept separate from other non-covered banned electronic waste. On occasion, a collector will receive a large television or other device that cannot fit into a Gaylord or easily set on a pallet. These larger devices can be stored in the same location with your other electronics as an individual, single, large device sitting on the floor next to other containerized devices. Last but not least, banned electronics cannot be stored on site for longer than 1 year. Electronic devices must not only be containerized or on a pallet, they are required to be labeled. The label at minimum must identify what is in the Gaylord. It must say electronic waste or used electronic devices, and a date on the label when the first device was placed in the Gaylord. The date will provide that proof. The label must be placed on the Gaylord that contains the electronics, or one label for items placed on a pallet, or if a single large item, too large for a pallet, is being stored, that single item must also have a label directly on the device itself. The sample label in this slide is one provided for collectors participating in the state standard eCycles program. This label can be obtained on the eCycles.vermont.gov website. For eCycles collectors, all covered and non-covered electronics must have a label, and those electronics must be kept separated with the appropriate label for what is covered by the program and what is not. The label is important for several reasons. First, it is required by the state to identify the waste within a Gaylord. The label shown above also has a place for the location name and facility ID number. This information is so the recycler can identify the source of the collected waste to notify the contractor and state for proper payment for the amounts collected by the facility. As we mentioned in the previous slide, the state management requirements also identify that electronic waste cannot be kept on site for more than 1 year. This is where you can prove the length of time the waste was stored at the facility and why this label and the date should be on the Gaylord when the first item is placed in the container for storage. Same with items on the pallet. This date shows an inspector how long the waste has been stored on site. In Section 4 of the State Procedure for the Environmentally Sound Management of Electronic Devices, commonly referred to as the procedure, aside from registration, storage, keeping electronics out of the regular trash, there are a host of other requirements, and we can start with one here that specifically pertains to collectors of electronics with the state standard eCycles program. And that is a requirement to clearly post these 2 posters where they are visible to the public, or signs developed by your facility that relay information that your facility is collecting specific electronics, namely computers, monitors, printers, televisions, and computer peripherals, at no charge for the eCycles program, and who is allowed to drop off these devices, and a limit of 7 or fewer devices for those who are not covered entities under the program, and that there is no limit for all others. Second, a sign or poster that informs your customer that it is their responsibility for any data on the equipment they drop off for free recycling. These posters and the banned electronics poster are made available by the state. For all collectors, the management standards also identify that your facility must have an attendant on duty to accept the electronics to place them carefully into the collection container. There must be a lock at minimum on the facility gate or on the storage unit where electronics are kept. This may also ensure that the electronics are stored at your facility and not subject to theft or removed without your knowledge. Next, if a cover device has a permanent cord, those cords cannot be cut for any reason. They must remain on the device and placed in the container. For the eCycles program, any loose cords that are part of any of the covered electronic devices must also be placed within the collection container with the device, along with any remotes or anything that goes with the device itself. Last and very important, all staff that manage electronic waste at your facility must be trained, and this video is a good way to make sure that happens. As you can see, proper storage for electronics is important, not only to manage the electronic device to prevent breakage, but also manage those electronic devices if a customer drops off something that is already broken or something that accidentally gets broken during storage or collection. The eCycles state standard program facilities must accept these broken devices, but as a collector, there are separate standards for broken electronic devices and their management. They must be containerized separately. That can be a contractor's bag if adequate to contain a small device. It can be a single Gaylord used to collect all broken devices, or something in between that is adequate to contain the broken device. to not only contain the release or spill, but also for worker safety. A CRT poses its own risk when it comes to breakage. The glass contains lead and lead dust when it breaks. Unfortunately, also because of the copper wiring on the back of the tube, many people remove the plastic case or wood from around the large CRT tubes to remove the copper wiring before bringing it to your facility. You must accept the TV, even if it has been taken apart like these in the photo. Parts must also be accepted, but the CRT tube is capable of imploding and throwing glass in all directions if something lands on it and it breaks. In addition, the wiring on the back of the tube can still carry a strong electrical charge long after it has been unplugged. If an electronic device breaks at your facility, you must clean it up immediately. Do not put any of this waste into the trash. Even broken electronics or electronic parts are banned from being disposed of in the regular trash. Handle these devices carefully, as stated before. Any broken electronic device must be placed into a container, and each container must be individually labeled. For the eCycles program, labels are available as shown above. Notice this label for broken covered electronics, and the label identifies computers, monitors, printers, televisions, and computer peripherals. Broken does not mean they no longer work. Most commonly, when we say broken, it's glass. If it's banned electronics that are not covered, you would place them in separate containers as well, except you would label them non-covered electronics. Large TVs that cannot be placed into a Gaylord or large flat panel TVs will commonly have broken screens. If taping the screens with some strong tape like duct tape or taping a bag or cardboard over the screen can prevent further breakage, that is also allowed. Remember, the idea is to prevent further breakage or release and to protect staff. Because electronic devices can break and pose hazards at your facility, as seen in the previous slides, the Vermont Electronics Program requirements state that every facility and event must have on-site an emergency release plan for any potential release or fire hazard from a damaged electronic device stored on site. A site can fulfill this requirement with the template and a copy of the fact sheet for the management of electronic waste, both shown on this slide. To obtain these, go to vtrecycles.com, click on the orange chasing arrows icon for the special recycling. Scroll to the bottom of the page under Collectors Resources and look for Release Plan under the Electronics section. Before we continue, we should mention that there are various facilities in Vermont that meet the definition of a collector in that they are a public or private entity that receives electronic devices. But when that collection is solely for the purpose of reuse, repair, or refurbishing electronic devices, these facilities must not only meet the standards identified in this video for collector activities, but have a few more important requirements. Vermont law states if this collection is solely for the purpose of repair or reuse or refurbishment, that they are not a recycler as defined by law. However, a facility such as this can remain not being classified as a recycler as long as they do not cross the definition line that makes them a recycler in law. So let's talk about what is allowed and what is not allowed for a refurbisher. A refurbisher, of course, can sell whole devices for reuse. They often receive devices which they may or may not have to repair and sell the whole device for the original purpose for which it was manufactured. Since they are a repair shop, they are allowed to dismantle or disassemble a device, and they are allowed to repair or refurbish using inventoried used parts or new parts for their customers. However, and this is the part that is important, for a refurbisher not to cross the line into recycling activities, A facility that solely collects for reuse, repair, or refurbishing cannot sell any used parts removed from devices in bulk or as an individual part to a customer. They can only use their used parts for inventory in order to repair or refurbish as a part of their business. Now let's talk about lithium-ion batteries briefly. This is a safety issue when collecting electronics because they can be highly flammable. These batteries are commonly used in electronics such as laptops, tablets, and small electronic devices. The older laptops had these batteries in a hard case, and it was not uncommon for people to remove those batteries. Today's computers are smaller and thinner, and the batteries are not in a hard case, but a thin foil-type bag. That foil, if punctured or torn, can very often cause an immediate fire. So do not ever attempt to remove any batteries from electronics. When accepting electronics, check the electronic device for any bulging or leaking batteries. Do not place damaged batteries in with your regular electronics collection. What do you do if you just receive a battery from a customer? Manage it separately from electronic waste to prevent a larger device from puncturing or breaking the battery. If a battery is bulging or leaking, place it outside of your facility in a separate container, such as a 5-gallon bucket, filled with kitty litter, sand, or even dirt, and especially away from anything flammable. For more information and resources on the Vermont Electronics Recycling Program, go to ecycles.vermont.gov. Thank you for your time.